Welcome once again to St. Louis. I'm your host, George Blaze. Within these next couple of weeks and months, we're going to be seeing an unprecedented crisis in terms of housing. A lot of the temporary fixes that were keeping people from being evicted, keeping from people being foreclosed upon, are starting to expire in different parts of the country. And I think we're not really aware of how serious the situation is and how it's going to get. We're going to get some insight today. Joining me now is the Executive Director of the Metropolitan St. Louis Equal Housing and Opportunity Council, Chaplain Will Jordan. Chaplain Jordan, good to see you.
Good to see you too, George. I'm happy to be here.
Well, tell me, am I exaggerating here when I'm kind of highlighting that we're in for a wave of evictions and foreclosures like we've never seen before?
You're not exaggerating, unfortunately. It's the truth. And what we're looking at is you're talking about in the 90s and the 2000s, the real push was for home ownership, right? And that kind of fell through after the crash of 2007. So you had a lot of people that are now renting. Well, those same people are now out of work because of the COVID-related issues, unemployment. And so we're talking just a dearth of people who are already probably been served notice by their landlords, not necessarily by the courts because of CARES Act. There's been some slowdowns, and even locally on the courts actually facilitating evictions. But there's a dearth of people nationwide, and St. Louis is no exception at all, that are about to be under the pressure of exactly what are they going to do as a family without any rent and without being able to stay where they're at, and where they're going to find another place big enough in this market. And, families, we're talking about overcrowding, people living in cars, people living with relatives. You talk about pressure because so many places are shut down and so many places are less hours. So there's nowhere for the kids to go. There's no mall for them to go to. There's no school for them to go to. So everybody's living right on top of one another. And now there's going to be overcrowding because of evictions, which are opening back up in the city and the county. So we expect it to be one of the biggest unsung crises of this century, is what's going to start happening right now. And it's going to roll for the next 2 years, the backlash of what's been happening.
Well, I mean, certainly property owners and people who have rental properties, when we first started this lockdown, they were clear that, well, if nobody's going to work, at some point, these people are going to stop paying their rent. You want, even a responsible landlord does everything they can for their tenants and tries to take care of it. But we have mortgages to pay as well. And if the landlord can't pay the mortgage, everybody is out. When we're talking about St. Louis County, specifically, are there things on the ground now that are keeping people going? Are we about to see an expiration of some of the protections?
So what you're seeing is there's been a court-ordered a moratorium on evictions that's lifting in both the county and the city. And those were done locally. You still have the sheriff's office, which is independent of the courts, but they work in conjunction with them with a limited schedule with respect to that because of COVID-related concerns, because they perform the evictions themselves and, private movers and whatnot. But what you see is that moratorium lifting and a lot of pressure from local attorneys and landlords and those attorneys who work for those landlords to allow the courts to open up and start doing evictions because, the landlords are suffering because they have not been able to collect rent and they've got mortgages and whatnot to also pay. And so you see a lot of a pressure that way. So what we've been really pushing for is statewide to allow for the Supreme Court of the state of Missouri to issue an order statewide to continue the moratorium, to take the pressure off the local judges to have to deal with these local landlords and their attorneys. And then they'll allow us to have some time to use the CARES Act funding that's getting on the ground right now to actually pay some of these landlords some of that back rent. So you're talking about several millions of dollars, both in the county, St. Louis County and St. Louis City, that's being put on the ground to actually provide for rental assistance as well as food, utilities, but a bulk of it is really to help people to pay rent because they've been out of work. There is a cap on the amount that one individual can get from CARES Act. I believe it's $3,500. And I'm certain that there's plenty of people who fall within that cap that could actually benefit from this, but it's going to take a little time for them to get it. And of course, you know, if you get an eviction on your record, that's might as well be like a felony conviction because it follows you the same way and it takes away housing opportunities for you and your family the same way a felony does for a long time. And it puts you in the hands of slum landlords and at the mercy of unstable opportunities, things that you don't want, especially when you have a disability or children involved and you just can't afford to have such unpredictability in your housing situation. And so having an eviction or even a threat of an eviction, right? Just the fact that a landlord filed for eviction on the record is enough to trigger many screening programs that landlords use to keep you out of really good housing or opportunities in the school district that you wanted or near the bus line or safe opportunities for housing. And so we're starting to see that happening right now. And our agency, as well as other legal services agencies in St. Louis County and St. Louis City, have been working with the city of St. Louis and St. Louis County to find a way to use part of the CARES Act funding to help people deal with this eviction issue. Because especially if it's just money and there's enough money available for you to get to stay in your place, then certainly the CARES Act can help. But if it's, let's say you owe $10,000 in back rent, and let's say part of it started with the CARES Act and part of it you had due back from February. That's a different situation because the CARES Act only provides for funding for persons who whose crisis started in March. And so some people, the crisis was extended in March, but it might have started before that. And unfortunately, those persons are not going to be able to take advantage of the CARES Act funding that's been put on the ground by the federal government through St. Louis County and St. Louis City to be able to get help. One of the things that may be available is mediation, that legal mediation, where if the landlord is willing to work with the person and they are able to get help, say with employment connections and get an opportunity for a job, and the landlord can be assured that they will get back on their feet. Maybe they can do some mediation to help see that they might be able to get that future rent at some point in time. But outside of that, we see this is going to be an issue. So there's some people that are going to be able to be helped and some people that might be in a little bit more dire situation. But we're kind of be sorting through those as those phone lines light up. We're going to be putting out a lot of information, sending out information, actually doing some direct mailings, as well as the city of St. Louis has got a pretty extensive mailing list themselves to let people know about the CARES Act funding and the ability for these agencies who have received the funding. They're already ready to go. Everybody from Urban League to United Way, Catholic Charities, a lot of different places we're all on the same team, on the same page to help out.
And it's not just landlords and building owners in terms of worrying about paying their rent and paying their mortgages. That we also need cooperation from the private sector, from the lenders and the banks who hold the mortgages to many of these properties. We need time and patience and cooperation from them. But if we look back on what's happened the last couple of months with some of these programs, the PPPs and these other things, it's not always the case that your local bank is got your back in these situations.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. You know, one of the things that we saw when they rolled out the program is that some of those banks that typically, I'd say, were kind of the culprits in doing a lot of distance kind of services, using computers, not talking to people. But one of the good things about that is that they can also run a program that says we're not going to foreclose on any of them. So you saw some large banks that just made a decision they were going to change their program and just not allow any foreclosures because the computer was doing all the work, which is great, right? But then now that CARES Act is that particular moratorium is over federally, there's only so many months they had to that. Hopefully they won't go back to just doing it the way they used to do it. And then, of course, our experience so far has actually been that the local banks here in the St. Louis metropolitan area have been a lot more willing to extend grace to the people who are that they're servicing their mortgages, which is great. The local banks, the larger banks, like I said, some of them were able to change their computer program and just not do any foreclosures for the last 3 months, which is great. And we're just hoping that they don't slide back to things as normal, because that could also provide a lot of heartache for homeowners in this time.
The other thing we don't want to see, which, I'm old enough, I think we're kind of the same age to remember back in the 70s and 80s. If you look at what happened in like the Bronx and parts of New York, where landlords, seeing that there wasn't light at the end of the tunnel for a couple of years, started to burn their own properties down and just take the insurance money rather than bothering with any of it. And when we look like a city at St. Louis, I don't know, some of these building owners are not the best people.
Yeah, we do have slumlord issues where we have absentee landlords that they're out of state and they just see it as an economic opportunity. We do look forward to the opportunity to be able to talk with the local landlords who actually have a more vested and citizens of the area, right? They want to see things not just economically, but they like to see the neighborhoods, benefit and the families benefit. So we look forward to working with those landlords, those distance landlords, and those persons who are just in it for economic opportunity. Unfortunately, and there's a lot of speculation in St. Louis housing market. And so because of that, there are quite a few landlords that are not necessarily here. And we hope that we don't see the same thing that happened in New York, but we're certainly not immune to it, because there are those types of landlords who are just not connected to our community the way the local landlords who actually live here are. So.
Yeah, and if what you're saying is true, that we have at least 2 more years of this to go, I mean, it's a pretty ugly situation out there. This COVID thing that's been going on has certainly stood in the way of the EHOC to be able to smoothly progress and do the work that you're doing. Tell me a little bit about how you've adjusted and how the organization continues to serve those in need.
Yeah, so it's a fairly big adjustment. For the most part, once St. Louis City, and that's where our offices are located in the city, gave the order for non-essential businesses to shut down. What we decided to do is that we wouldn't shut down, but we are all working from home. And so what that caused us to have to do is to make certain that everyone had the opportunity to have internet, whether they had a strong internet service before or not. That's one of the burdens that we have to deal with, and then on top of that, making sure everybody has a laptop, everyone has access to the secure electronic services, so that we don't have any problems with any breaches of security or whatnot. Also to have access to the server, which is also not going to be on site, right? And then using more cloud services. And so there's a lot of things we had to do kind of some of the things we were ready for, and other things we had to put in place pretty quickly in order for us to continue to interface with folk, because say a third of the people that we dealt with, they came face to face, they showed up at the office. When you come show up at the office now, likely you're going to see a sign that says call this number, because we're not here right now, but we are available, and we do have a hotline. And if you can't get us, we do return phone calls, but that's not the same as being able to walk in and get service. And so we're working remotely right now, and we have to do everything that we're doing as a fair housing agency. We're doing it remotely. So a lot of Zoom meetings and education sessions about fair housing and the law, working with other attorneys. The courts have been closed, and so we're doing a lot of mediations and doing a lot of negotiations with landlords and attorneys, and with the ongoing cases with HUD, with the Department of Justice, and everything's happening by Zoom calls, which, you have to have a good connection, and the computer and the software and And then, of course, you're making copies and stuff like that. Now you're kind of doing it from home, and you're mailing stuff out, and you got to do that from home too. So there's a lot of different ways we can get around it. But honestly, it's a shift in how we're getting business done. And there was a lot of things we had to do in order to get all of our 8 employees to be able to work not from a central location with a copier and a mail machine, to be able to interface and to get calls directly to them on their cell phone, right? And so there's extra costs involved in all of those things. And of course, the fact is, when you're working from home, the lines kind of get blurred, right? Even though you kind of want to go from 9 to 5, but quite honestly, when you got to get stuff done, you got to get it done whenever you can get it done. So I'm used to returning emails at 9 o'clock at night, and I'm used to getting emails that are really urgent at 9 o'clock at night too. And what am I going to do? I got to do what I got to do because the work must go on. And I'm certain a lot of people are going through that same thing. And we're happy that we're actually still working, right? But at the same time, it really has changed the way we're getting work done. And we have to reassure the community that we are there, we're out here, and that when you call us, we do have the means to investigate a housing discrimination claim. We will make phone calls, and even if we have to do things on site, we are able to do that. But of course, we have to use PPE and follow all the protections and stuff like that. And so, but we're still here and we're still working. And if you have an issue, you can still call us. And certainly, even if you don't get directly through to us because we're on the phone with so many other people, we will return your phone call. But I'm certain other businesses have had to go through the same, especially non-for-profit social service agencies. There are many of them are still doing the same thing. And we have 8 employees, but if you think about someone who's got 100, and they all were working on site, now you got to get 100 laptops and 100 internet connections and 100 PPEs, and I mean that's and there's places that's got more than 100 people working. So my hats go off to all of those fair housing, all those social service agencies out there that do have so many people that are now working from home, to be able to get the same jobs done without being able to do it and in one location, because that's an amazing feat.
I would imagine that many people, tenants out here, are kind of hesitant to reach out for help because they think that, well, if I file a complaint against my landlord, it's going to exacerbate the problem and they're going to retaliate against me. Is there a way to assuage that fear that people may have?
Man, that's such a good question, George. I'm glad you asked it because actually, we do have, when you call 534-5800, you'll have the option of getting fair housing complaint dealt with, or if you have a landlord-tenant issue, which is surrounding evictions. And certainly when people see that, they should hit that landlord-tenant line, because in that way we are set up to be able to help to deal with, and we're very understanding of that relationship between the landlord and the tenant, so that everything is not necessarily going to be a complaint filed against a particular landlord because of something that they've done. If there is a way to bridge the gap through mediating it so that you can stay in there, we want your family to be stable, we're able to do that. So I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people think that since we are a fair housing agency, that everything we do is complaint based. But actually, we do a lot of mitigation, we do a lot of mediation, and we do a lot of phone calls and trying to get everybody on the phone to make it work out so that people can stay stabilized with their families. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is the case, that some people are afraid to call because they think that once they call us, they're just taking the gloves off. Well, not yet. Not yet. We're going to give the opportunity for it to be an amicably resolved situation first, because we do know that once you pull the gloves off, so do the landlords, right? And if you're fighting them, they're fighting you. And so that's not necessarily what you always want to go in with. And we are very accustomed to being able to bridge that gap.
And of course, the other side of it is that many tenants, renters, and other people might not know you already have quite a few built-in rights that you may not be aware of, in terms of how long it takes to do an eviction, what the process is. It's not like someone could just knock on the door and be like, okay, well, it's been 5 days late, you got to get out by the end of the month. It doesn't work that way.
I'm so glad you brought that up too, man. You're all over it. And that's exactly right. The issue is,
I'm a landlord, so I've been through it.
Well, so you understand. That's right.
I do.
So we do have those kind of situations where, you'll
And
have
I'll
a
tell you,
single
you know what?
mom.
And since I have you here, just in full disclosure, to be perfectly honest, the biggest problems I've had as a landlord is dealing, particularly with if you have units that are Section 8 or have some other kind of entity that's involved in it. That gets super complicated, and there are things that renters and building owners also they need to understand what all this is about.
Yeah, that's really good. Typically, when people get their feet wet doing, and I applaud you for doing Section 8 rental, because I think that it's a great program, but it does take someone who is astute as a landlord, right? Because there's other things that you have to take into consideration, and there's a whole nother agency that you're interfacing with who's actually paying you and is actually holding you to some other responsibilities outside of just the tenants themselves. And so, but once you're able to understand that, I think once you have done that and you're comfortable with it, it's great that you can be able to do that because you know what to do with. A neophyte landlord doing that might get discouraged. But when I'd say being a Section 8 landlord is certainly a good opportunity for someone who's been in the business for a while, who is stable. And then when you see that, then you don't operate out of crisis because you got to understand what's going to happen next. Not only do you understand the basic landlord tenant law, right? But you also understand the extra things that are involved when it comes to getting a check directly from the United States government or HUD for the rent for clients who are subsidized. So I do applaud you for doing that. And I can tell you that many people, right, both landlords and tenants, it's unfortunate that landlords don't have some kind of free program that the city would offer them as they become landlords on how to deal with these kind of issues, right? Because nobody's footing the bill to educate a landlord, but they should have some education as well as tenants about, like things like illegal lockouts, right? Just because a tenant's not paying rent, you don't change the locks or turn off the electricity in the middle of the summertime, right? Because that can really cause a lot of problems, injury or death, and it's against the law. But a lot of people don't know that, and so they need to have that kind of education. And because what is an eviction? Every a tenant needs to know that they can get a letter of notice to evict from a landlord, and it's perfectly legal. But it doesn't mean you have to run out tonight, right? Because you got kids in school and you don't even know where you're going. And you don't have the money to rent another place. And if you uproot 3 people overnight, you're probably going to be in your car in the park overnight. You know what I'm saying? And so, so you got to understand, there's steps to this whole thing. It takes time. But when you get that notice, that means you got to start tapping into the help you need to get right now to be able to pay that rent. Because a lot of times the landlords are telling you, hey, if you pay the rent, we're all good, right? So it's a money kind of situation. He ain't even mad at you. He likes you, but you got to pay the rent. And so now you be able to go to a social service agency and tell them, hey, me and my landlord, we get along well, but he's not going to be able to, make his mortgage if I don't pay the rent. So maybe you can help me out with rent. So this is a real simple situation. Rent equals stay in the place, right? It's not necessarily based upon you and the landlord not getting along with one another, but you got time to get that done, even right up until you show up in court. Because if you show up in court and you got the money, all the money, and maybe the landlord will say, hey, I'll waive some of these legal fees if you got my money 3 months rent, and you give them to him right there. The judge will say, well, is everybody happy? And the landlord said, I'm happy. And the tenant says, I'm happy. All right, well, you guys go on and continue this wonderful relationship, and for the term of this lease. But some people don't know that you can show up with the money in court. So having knowledge will actually make you feel a whole lot less stressful on every level. And our organization has worked on in the landlord tenant pro se court in the city and in the county for several years. And a lot of times landlords are as unsophisticated about what's going to happen in the court process as the tenants are. And so we have to sit down with everyone and kind of reassure them that some of their greatest fears are not necessarily going to come to pass. But this process does have a first things first and second things second, and a way that, before the sheriff does anything, the judge has to do this. Before the judge does this, the landlord has to do this. And so You kind of getting those things in line and showing that there is a timeline that we're working with. And all along that timeline, there's always the opportunity for some money to fall from heaven to make it all better. And that's what we're always looking for along that timeline. Because about 75% of the time, maybe 95% of the time, if money falls from heaven, everybody's going to be happy. The landlord's going to be happy. The tenant's going to be happy. We just need some money. And most of the time, that's what we're dealing with. Then in those rare occasions, we're actually dealing with a situation where people are being treated differently because they have a disability or because they have kids or whatnot. And that's what we're here for, to kind of weed those out. But like I said, 75 to 95% of the time, all we need is money.
Well, Chaplain Jordan, you said it best. And I think the key here is communication. Start the communication process as soon as possible. Don't wait till things start to really fall off a cliff there. The work you're doing is fantastic. And if there's anything we could do to continue getting the message out for you, please let us know here. But we didn't even talk about this issue where the president today announced that he's removing the federal guidelines regarding building affordable houses in the suburbs. It's a really ugly situation out here for everybody.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, that 2 years. We're talking like a lot of this stuff is going to take a couple of years for us to see how it's going to shake out, and it's not going to be good.
Well, Chaplain, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us. And those of you watching today, if you need help, you can always log on to the Metropolitan St. Louis Equal Housing Opportunity Council. That's EHOCSTL.org, and there's lots of information in the portal there. And hopefully in a couple months, we'll talk to you and we'll see where we're at.
We will see. We'll be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week right here on NOW.St. Louis.